Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are very honored today to have Ambassador Maurice Gourdault-Montagne sharing his views with our chairman, Mr. Ronnie Chan, on Sino-Euro relations. As many of you know, this is a very interesting world that we're living in with so many pieces moving all the time. And this cannot be more timely as a topic. So without further ado, may I invite Ambassador to come on stage. May I also invite Ronnie to come on stage.
Thank you, Maurice, for joining us. It's truly a great honor to have you with us.
Ronnie.
For those of us who are longtime Asia Society members, you know that we do a lot of programs on U.S.-Asia relationship, but not too many Asia-Europe programs. And I think that we should add more of that in the coming mix. And we are very, very delighted that such a knowledgeable, experienced diplomat should be among us. In the last couple of years, I happen to also chair an organization called the Better Hong Kong Foundation. And our vice chair is sitting here, Dario. Great to have you. We go around Europe in the last couple of years trying to understand where they are in relationship to Asia Pacific. And no question, in particular to China, there's no question that we have observed in the last few years a gradual shift. It shifted to the worse, and in the last 2 years, we noticed a shift to the better from our perspective, meaning that the relationship is perhaps warming up and not as difficult as a few years ago. So one of the persons that we have contacted many people, and we found that one of the most knowledgeable individual that can really be a very effective interlocutor for us from Hong Kong, which is part of China, is our guest of honor today. He is successively, just think about it, he was successively French ambassador to Tokyo, to Berlin, to Court of St. James, England, Great Britain, I don't know how great it is still, but anyway, and finally to China. And so he is a gentleman who knows Asia very well. He served on the two of the most important capitals, Tokyo and Beijing. He served in Germany and London, very important. And he became also the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry of France. And I've been trying to figure out whether that is the equivalent of 外交部的秘书长还是外交部的常务副长. I don't know which, but anyway, it doesn't matter. What is important is really the knowledge and experience of the gentleman who is here with us today. So let me begin just ask you a couple of questions, and you can take it wherever you want. By the way, a couple of weeks ago, Dario, myself, and a few other members of the Better Hong Kong Foundation were in Paris, and we had a very, very wonderful dinner where we have 4 people, your good self. We had the former foreign minister of Spain, Arantxa Gonzalez. We have the former fellow diplomat of yours, but a lot older, what's his name? Thierry de Montbrial, and then also a business leader, former chair of Amundi and now chairman of the Rothschild Bank, and that is Yves Perrier. That dinner, I thought, was worth the trip to Paris. The quality of discussion was really high, and no small part due to the contribution of Maurice. So let me first ask you a off-the-wall question. 3 years ago, Dario and I and a few others, we went to Paris, and the government has now an organization to promote Paris. Now, Paris is a cultural center, artistic center. Paris needs no promotion. So why are they promoting Paris? Because They saw that, I suppose, with Brexit, that perhaps the financial service industry may move. And they were telling us how that Paris will be the next financial center of Europe. And when I first heard that, I said, no, 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 it cannot be. When I go to Paris, you all speak French, and most people in the world don't speak French. But 2 years later, I must say that I'm surprised. Everybody speaks English, it seems. And my staff told me that for my international relationship exercise in Europe, we will see more fund manager in Paris than in London. Wow. So sorry, I know that you are in the stratosphere, you're in the diplomacy world. So allow me to bring it down as my first question, Paris. What's going on? Since Brexit, is France really taking advantage of it? Paris really becoming the financial service center that matches England, let's not say surpassing England, but at least to be a co-equal maybe? It's not Germany, by the way, which surprised me a little. So can you tell us a little bit about France and Paris after Brexit?
First of all, Ronnie, thank you so much for having me at the Asia Society Hong Kong. And I am very pleased to see here our Consul General. She was, when I was in Beijing from 2014 to 2017, she was the one who was monitoring me and looking at me, and she was reading all the dispatches we were sending. She was the first one to read them. So I am always under her control, even now. And pleased also, I'm very pleased to see...
She's a lovely Consul General.
We are very proud of her. And I'm very pleased also to see the smiles and the familiar faces whom I knew when I was in Beijing, and when I had the opportunity to come here to meet with the French friends of the French community, to see how dynamic they can be. So thank you so much, because it has a link with what Paris is now. Yes, it's right that we are trying, by all means, the French, to promote Paris, because the Brexit, when it happened, was a big trauma. The EU lost 15% of its GDP, lost a population of consumers and producers of 60 million inhabitants. So, and as we know, nature doesn't like the vacuum. So there was also a major trauma for the city, of which we thought we could take some advantage. In particular, the European portfolio for the city, which is the transactioning of euro in the city, which was a permission. They were not in the euro, they got it, and we decided at the European level that it should be done somewhere else. And so it was an opportunity for Paris to try to attract banks and financial institutions. And the governor of the French bank made a tour everywhere to try to convince people. And it works, because as you say, as you have noticed yourself, plenty of investment funds are now in Paris. Barclays Bank is in Paris. JP Morgan also is in Paris. Jamie Dimon came recently to open a branch in Paris. So I think it's something which doesn't mean that the city of London has lost all its capacities and skills. But it was, I would say, a fierce battle, or I wouldn't say battle because it's too aggressive, but it was a fierce competition, let's say, with Amsterdam and Frankfurt. And I must say that at the end of the story, Paris succeeded, because Paris, in France, though every one of you knows the situation, the political situation in France, on which I will not, I would say, talk too much, because it's internal politics, and every country has its own issues, its own problems. But I would say the fundamentals in France are still there. And so infrastructure, skills, higher education, R&D, and the will of having France as a sort of hub because of the geographical situation. In a world in transformation, we think that France can still play a role in a world which is I would say, more interconnected, even fractured. We shall come back on the issue. But having the closest relations with Germany having its own problems as well, but we share problems. We have complementarities which are still there. I would say, looking towards the south. And now the south is more and more important. The global south, we talk about it, though it's not in the south, it's everywhere, the global south. But still heterogeneous, but France has a tradition of independence in talking to everyone in the world. That's the Gaullist tradition. We don't belong to any bloc, though there can be some, I would say, sleeping, moments in our policy, in our foreign policy. But Paris, on its own, has some advantages which we try to put on display and have some advantage of it.
It's truly amazing that a city like Paris, can you make sure that you don't have as many labor actions, that the airport doesn't close down so much? As long as you can manage that one, people love Paris, people love France, and we would love to go there more. But somehow, I think if you can fix that a little, if not, that may still become a drag to the ambition of Paris.
French society, as everywhere in the world, is changing, but it's keeping also its own traditions. Changing because we attract, I would say, populations from other parts of the world. We have to find out the ways and means to have the right equilibrium between those populations. It's a long debate. These are long-term actions to be undertaken. But at the same time, yes, we have traditions, we have unions, we have social traditions. It's true, I will not deny, we take to the street. And I remember when I was in London, I had a discussion, a debate on these issues, and the British gentleman in front of me told me, we queue up and you take to the street. And that's the difference, major difference of behavior with the French. So we try to contain these movements, but at the end, there is always a solution, and so it works.
Let's go back now to the diplomatic space that you are such an expert and experienced person. I remember about 10 years ago, people start talking about G2, meaning US and China. And I told people at the time, I said, China would never accept G2. China prefer a multilateral approach. They don't want to stick out their head, become the other G together with G1, which is the US. But I don't hear people talk about G3 except in Europe. Of course, the G3 meaning EU. How do you see the world in this dimension? Is it a G2 world? Will there be a G3 world? Or will it be a G1 world? What is the world going to look like as we see it evolve?
As everyone here, I've noticed that President Trump, during just after the meeting he had and prior to the meeting he had with President Xi Jinping, pronounced the word G2. And I remember it was during the time I was in China. I remember the Chinese officials we are talking to rejecting this idea of a G2. G2 means harsh competition, and G2 it means a tête-à-tête, which is never, I would say, pleasant. I have another example at the European level, which is not of a G2, but which is a tête-à-tête between France and Germany. My experience of the tête-à-tête between two countries is that it's always frustrating, it's always insufficient, and we need a sort of broker between us, someone else. That's why the Brexit was a tragedy, because when you had the British in the EU, you had the French and the Germans, and always when something went wrong, one of the two was always managing some solution with the third party. And that's where the British were very useful, or it was Britain, Germany, and we were managing something with them. So when I hear this idea of the G2, it means harsh competition between the US and China, which in my view exists in a way regarding this competition for key technologies, because key technologies will structure the world of tomorrow, not because one or the other will be producing more, but the one who will, I wouldn't say win, the one who will be the first will have his own technology, having norms and standards imposed on all the regions where they will propagate these technologies. And so that's where the competition between the US and China takes place. And here, precisely, the tête-à-tête between China and the US is, I wouldn't say dangerous, but can be very rough. And that is precisely where one needs a third party. And the third party, as you said, could be the EU, should be the EU. Should be the EU because of the size, because of the weight, because of the, I have to say, the capability of the EU for a right balance of the world. And it's now up to the EU to find out the right place. If you allow me, I could say a bit more about it.
Please.
Because as long as we had, I would say, a happy globalization, there were no issues between all these big ensemble. China had its own development, I would say nourished by the Americans and by the trade with America, by the exchange of students and all that, by some R&D, and there was no, in the eyes of the Americans, no danger for the American hegemony. The EU had very happy moments with China since the first agreements we had in 75, then in 86, then the support given by the EU to China in 2001. You remember in the WTO, World Trade Organization.
2001.
Then 2008, let's remember the support given by China through investments during the financial crisis. Then it started to become more complicated. I think 2009, 2008 was the beginning of a waking up by the countries, by the emerging countries. Let's call them like that. And let's remember that the BRIC at the time, because the South Africans joined a bit later, they were founded. They started in 2009, which was the first time emerging countries thought, oh my God, should we follow this Western model which can derail, which has derailed already once, which was the war in Iraq, actually. The hubris of the Americans, they wanted, after the fall of the USSR, to impose democracy everywhere. And as President Chirac, whom I served for 5 years, was saying, if democracy is not accepted, we shall bring it in armored vehicles. And that's what happened.
Did Chirac say it or America say it?
Chirac did.
Chirac
said that. Said that, and it was not the proper way of having a democracy. And we know the result of this Iraq war. 2008, these were the subprime crisis. I was in London at the time, I remember. A sort of hubris as well. So everything is possible, the bonus are there, no limits. And 2008, the beginning. And so there was a reaction. And at that moment, I remember I was in China in 2016. That was the big issue of China acceding to the market economy status. And we were all discussing about it, and there was a big debate within the EU, should we accept it or not? Is China a developed country? Is China not a developed country? It was both. And China was practicing dumping, in particular in steel. And so the decision was taken, let's China, I would say, stick to its commitments regarding no dumping policies, and let's postpone the idea of having China in this status of a market economy. So that was the beginning of a frowning, in a way, between China and the European Union. Then there was this idea of 2019. You remember the big visit, tremendous visit of President Xi Jinping to Paris, received by Mrs. Merkel, President Juncker of the Commission. So these were glorious times when thought at the time we have a concept, partner, competitor, and systemic rival. I think the concept was not well understood in China, which saw that as a sort of, I would say, reluctance to go ahead with China. That's how I felt it. But it was still a success because we were considering the rise of China and the fact that Mrs. Merkel herself came from Berlin to Paris, that the President of the Commission came to Paris, that was a sort of tribute paid to China. Yes, we recognize the importance of China in this general, I would say, evolution of the world. It's important to have the perspective. That's why I am just reminding all these events. Then we had the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis was a major break. Major break because it prevented us from going further. We had to restart, to bounce back on the crisis which had affected us, which had affected China, which had affected the US. It was a new start, in a way. And we had the war in Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine, the aggression by the Russians, a violation of the Charter, and at this moment, the fractures of the world which we had observed for the last 10 years took some consistency, in a way. Because at that moment, one saw, with all the votes at the UN in the early 2022, after the Russians invaded Ukraine, we saw that 40 to 60% of 40 to 60 countries at the UN refused to condemn, but all abstained or were not in the room during the vote, which is the easiest way of not participating. And it was a surprise. It was a surprise, and then this surprise crystallized because we decided to have sanctions on Russia. And we tried to convince the rest of the world, and in fact, we convinced no one. We convinced always the OECD countries. There are only 34 countries who are imposing sanctions on Russia. Now 20 packages, which shows that it is a difficult matter. Russia, the war is still on. Very soon it will be 4 years. And so we saw this fracturing. And China, we insisted on having China condemning Russia. Here, I have my personal views. I think we have
retired diplomat.
We have put. I am no longer active, Madam Consul General. I am no longer active. I am a free man now, so I have no instructions. We have put this elephant, Ukraine, in the middle of the road, for having a closer relationship between the EU and China. Why did I remind all the steps which we had with China, the EU with China? Because it worked very well. We had common interests. But now we have Ukraine. And we say, by every meeting with the Chinese, do condemn. Can we force China to condemn? Of course not. But will China condemn? Of course not. Because you cannot condemn your major neighbor. You cannot condemn a country on which you depend on your energy, which is vital for your very existence, which is existential. And so, as long as we shall do that, it will be very complicated. We start with this first thing. Instead, I think now the story between China and the EU is a story of missed opportunities. Missed opportunities. Why? Because we are attending a global change of on the international stage. A global change for many reasons, in particular the fact that emerging countries are organizing themselves, that China has taken a lead. This morning we had a discussion about the international monetary system. My conviction is that what China, but in France and in Europe it's not well understood, what has, I would say, hit the most the international relations are sanctions by the Americans. The extraterritoriality of sanctions is something, through the dollar, through the transactions in dollar, is something which has hit, I would say, the whole of the international community. I made the experience myself. When I was a Secretary General, it was the time President Trump unplugged the agreement, the JCPOA, the General Agreement on Nuclear with Iran. So no more agreement. So the Iranians came to us and said, but what will you do? And so all the French companies were threatened if they continued to think of investments in Iran, to which we had against a renunciation on sovereignty regarding the nuclear. We had promised $40 billion of investments. The Iranians were telling us, will you invest? And so all the companies were saying, the French companies, no, we shall not invest because we should be deprived of investing in the US, and we need the US as a market. So the threat by the US made all this agreement totally fall apart. We decided to invent a barter system which was called Instex. The French, the British, and the Germans, we decided. I was the French representative in this device, which was supposed to gather sufficient funds to make the Iranians able to export their oil. And which was the major thing, the major purpose of the agreement for them. And there was never enough money in the fund. It was a sort of barter system. And the Iranians, I remember the vice minister, who is now the minister for foreign affairs in Iran, telling me, do you want us to export pistachio and carpets, or do you want to export our oil? And so, because everyone was threatened by the sanctions, and the ones who were not respecting the US extraterritorial jurisdiction would be deprived of their capabilities on the American market. Plus, they will be accused of threatening the American security, which was the case for the ones in Instex. So, we are in a situation where everyone in the world, every country has experienced this idea that, yes, we can be sanctioned. Do you know that there are about more than 50 countries in the world which are under sanctions? From Cuba, 1962, until Russia, over too many, and so many countries. Sometimes
50, did you say?
50, about 50 countries.
That's 1/4 of the world's
Yes,
United Nations member
absolutely.
almost.
And so everyone is fearing that they would be imposed sanctions. Hence, China taking a lead, which we should take into consideration, because China not only takes the lead, but China has about 100 countries and is the first trading partner of about 100 countries. So it's a natural leadership for China. And in between, we have put Ukraine in the middle. At the moment, we should try to find out the ways and means to work with China, with those countries, with those new regions. I am always very, I would say, cautious and vigilant on a new development, which are all these preferential tariff zones, RCEP, for instance, Regional Cooperation and Economic Partnership, which had its first summit RCEP, yes, which has its first summit in Malaysia just recently with the APEC summit. So these are huge ensembles. CPTPP as well, without China, but the British are very clever. They've joined the CPTPP. Why is not the EU with China to work with China in these zones? In fact, now if we want to sum up I would say the difficulties for which the EU has to find out a strategy out of 3 difficulties. First difficulty, we want to decouple from Russian energy, because most of the sanctions are against Russia and imposing a cutoff of supply of oil and gas in the EU, first, with a tremendous effects on Germany in particular, but the rest of the EU as well. Second, we want to be independent of the US, because in between there is this the elections of President Trump for a second mandate, and we are not sure about security. And half of Europe is relying on the US. And third, we want to de-risk from China. So it's difficult. These are the 3 major objectives we have, which are in fact negative objectives in a way, because to de-risk, to decouple, and to be independent, which means, are we alone? No, we are not alone. We are in a globalized world. We have supply chains, we have value chains in which we depend on each other. So these are the major stakes which we have to deal with, which are challenges. How can we manage these challenges? This is the big question mark.
Then I want to bring you to what happened. I think it was yesterday that you were in a session on the Family Business Summit, together with the present ambassador of EU to Beijing. And I was totally flabbergasted when your ambassador, not France but EU, said that China must condemn Russia because this is existential threat to Europe. My question to him this morning was this, and you were there. My question to him was, China's existential threat number one is energy security. And still so much of the oil and natural gas come through the Malacca Strait that if the Seventh Fleet of the United States were to blockade the Malacca Strait within weeks, China will be on its knees. And so this is, energy security is existential to China. So how can the EU, explain to me, I fail to understand, how can the EU ambassador say, it is existential threat to me, so you should kill yourself, China, and condemn Russia. And Russia is the closest supply of the pipeline and so forth of energy to China. In case the sea link is blocked, Russia is the only one that China really can rely on. And so it's existential to China. So how come EU today is so self-centered that because of my existential threat, you have to kill yourself, China, to support us? Now, that's a bad part. The good part is this. We just spent a couple of days in Paris, and I noticed that the business community are now more open than last year and certainly more open than 2 years ago to finally invest or at least approach China for economic relationship, which was not there a few years ago. So the private sector is already leading the charge, but your EU ambassador is, to me, so ridiculous. Now, will the politics follow economics, or will politics choke the economics and make you again desegregate from China?
First of all, energy security is a key thing for every country, and for the EU as well as for China. We need energy. We have some, of course, renewables. We have nuclear energy regarding France, but we have also in our mix a lot of fossil energy. And so in certain countries still the coal is exploited. In France no longer, but we need oil and gas imported because we don't have it. But no, actually there are two kinds of, there is security, energy security, but there is the issue of Ukraine. It is also existential to us, and that's why when I talk about when I say that we have an elephant in the room, which is Ukraine, which is a barrier which obstructs the roads between the EU and China, it's why maybe we should take the thing by another way. It's existential on a security point of view. And there are concepts which have existed in the past, which have totally lost of sight nowadays, which are the concept of pacific coexistence. We can live together without being too close to each other, but I would say admitting that the other can still exist. So pacific coexistence and collective security. In my view, this is one of the ways which could be, I would say, followed to one of the paths which could be followed to find out a solution to Ukraine. And this is the issue of the guarantees of security, which has been, I would say, raised during Trump and Putin's meeting, the first meeting in Anchorage. The issue was there, and this meeting in Budapest, which didn't take place, but this was also on the table. Guarantees of security, which involves the rest of the world. Collective security is not only now for, as it was during the Cold War, between the US and USSR of the time and Russia of now. It should involve every country. After Anchorage, there there were many meetings. There was a meeting of the Europeans, and the Europeans have set up a coalition of the willings, which should send troops not too close to the front line, which would be frozen for a while. So plenty of ideas, but actually immediately rejected by the Russians, who said, these are NATO countries. We will never accept any NATO soldier on the Ukrainian soil. So the Ukrainians would like to have some support. And we saw a statement made by Lavrov. I am not here the spokesman of Lavrov, but because
Foreign Minister
of Russia. Of course not. But I think we should look closer to what has been said, because it's not so far away of our own thought. Lavrov mentioned the idea of having guarantees of security exerted by the P5, plus Germany, plus Turkey, and others, which mean that it's open. When he says the P5, these are the permanent members of the Security Council, which are the US, which is Russia, which is France and Britain, but as well China. China is involved in a settlement of the crisis, they want it or not. That's something which seems to me very clear for the future. And if I'm not wrong, there were 2 missions of a special envoy by Beijing, Ambassador Li Hui, who came to Europe last year, who came to Moscow and Kiev, and met with counterparts, with a 12-point plan in which there are some principles of the Charter of the UN which are reminded, non-aggression, respect of the integrity of borders, respect of sovereignty and all that, on which we agree. There is no recognition of the annexation of territories by Russia on Ukraine. So there is a sort of common ground. So what I wouldn't say this is the solution. What I would say is we should, from our side, find out the ways and means to propose something which is more common ground with a major country like China, which could not be a broker, but impose its own idea and contribute to the solution. It's a matter of finding out the contributors. And so here we are, because it's true that Ukraine issue is existential to the Western Europe. It's existential to the eastern part of Europe, because they have been occupied by the Soviet Union in the past, and so they keep the memory, and it's very important. Memory of the countries are so important. I remember when I was in London, just a little anecdote to illustrate what I mean by this idea of memory. I was in London and I met Professor Julian Jackson. I presented him an award of the French Republic, and he's a professor of history at Cambridge. And he had written a book which was called The Fall of Europe, which is 1940, when there was no more Europe except the British. And I told him that, and he wrote a lot about the resistance in France, resistance in Italy, and in many countries of Europe against the Nazi occupation. And I told him, is it interesting for the British to read something about the resistance? And he told me, yes, of course, because Britain is the only country in that part of the world which was never occupied. Since William the Conqueror in 1066, they don't know what is to live below the boots of a foreign occupier.
Interesting.
And so I found it very interesting, because every country has its own collective emotional memory. That's how he calls it, Professor Julian Jackson. The Chinese have their collective emotional memory. The 100 years of humiliation, this is a collective emotional memory. Every folk, every country, let's think, what is the collective emotional memory of the French? It is, of course, the French Revolution. It took us about 1 year to swallow and digest it, with the great laws on democracy and the communes and the freedom of the press and all that. One century to swallow it. Then we had the First World War, and we had the Second World War, when we were beaten by the Germans, where we were defeated. The 25th of June 1940 is the saddest day of the French history. There was no more France. The Germans occupied France. That explains now that, it's interesting to have it in mind, the French have a nuclear power, military power. it costs us about 10 billion euros a year, which is a huge amount for a country which has debts, which has lots of issues in education, healthcare, and all that. Never and nowhere on the political stage in France, in the right-hand side, and on the right parties, in the left parties, you see anyone telling anything against the deterrence and the cost of it. Why? Because in the collective emotional memory, no one wants ever again to have no more France as we had on the 25th of June 1940. Wow. So this is collective emotional memory. And so I made this this detour, and I've lost the thread of my thought.
It's okay.
But anyway, guarantees of security are crucial. Collective emotional memory of Ukrainians, but collective emotional memories of the Russians. So let's try to find out the ways and means to set up a system which could, I would say, guarantee the independence of Ukraine and get rid of the Ukraine issue between China and the European Union.
How do you see what Bill Clinton said to, I believe it was Yeltsin, that NATO would not move an inch to the east? Is that, and I think Bob Gates might have written about it. So did it move to the east, or is the Ukraine war avoidable?
So I remember the time of the fall of the USSR and the fall of the wall of Berlin. I was in Germany at the time when the wall fell, and it was a big surprise. The ones who tell you I knew it would happen, they lie, because no one knew actually at the time. There were lots of unrests in Poland, in Hungary, but the repression by the USSR was such in the past that everyone would think they will calm it down and nothing will happen. In the GDR, it happened, and the wall fell. And I remember at the time, the USSR was totally shaken. And 1991, there was the fall of the USSR, the end of the USSR, and the 15 republics of the USSR fell apart, and each of them became independent, including Ukraine. The idea at the time was we must repair and rebuild the economies of those countries. That was the major priority. No one thought of the security issues. It was totally put aside, and security is something which is needed. That was the time Mr. Baker, Secretary Baker, actually,
yes, James Baker.
Jim Baker.
Honorary Chairman of Asia Society Houston Center.
And Jim Baker was with his colleagues, and he was the one actually who, in his memoirs, has written that there was this promise. Foreign Minister Dumas, French one, also wrote it. There is nothing written as such, and there was no commitment by the NATO countries that there wouldn't be 1 inch further to the east. It was never written. These were words said. There is only one document which exists, which I saw by political directors, a meeting of political directors of Germany, the US, UK, and France. And they said, and Russia, and they said, we shall not go further inch beyond the Elbe River. So they said it, but there was no pact, no commitment, no engagement. And for a while, one didn't talk about security, one didn't talk about NATO. In 1997, that was Clinton, that was the first time one spoke of expanding NATO. Some people say that it's the reason why, the reason for it was that Clinton, for his re-election, needed the votes of the Poles in certain states of the US.
Heard of that.
Right or wrong, the truth is that it started from that moment. And I would say step by step, there were more and more countries belonging to NATO. The Russians didn't say at the time anything. It was Yeltsin time. It was the rebuilding. It was a major crisis in the USS in Russia, and so no one was saying anything. But the more the time went, the more things became complicated. Because in 2004, the former 3 Baltic republics of the USSR,
Yes.
who had become, at the same time, member countries of the EU, became member of NATO. And there was the Ukraine issue. And I remember that President Chirac, end of 2006, I was his special diplomatic advisor, told me, Ukraine, there will be a problem. It's complicated. And he asked me to go to Moscow to meet my opposite number, to discuss with him of a plan which could, I would say, work out about Ukraine and the status of Ukraine. And I went with a draft plan to meet this colleague. And the plan was a cross-protection of Ukraine by the NATO on the one side and Russia the other side. Cross-protection. We had at the time the NATO-Russia Council, which was I would say, a subsidiary of NATO. And this status would have been ruled by this Russia-NATO Council. So the Russian colleague read that. His name was Sergei Prihodko, passed away unfortunately. And he read my draft and he said, oh, that's very interesting because it will save our status in Sebastopol. Sebastopol, as you may know, is a major harbor in Crimea on the Black Sea.
Right.
At the time, remember, Crimea was belonging to Ukraine. Since 1954, Khrushchev giving it to Ukraine, from Russia to Ukraine.
Being a Ukrainian himself.
Absolutely. But there was a lease for the stationing of a Russian base in Sebastopol. So the Russians were very much fearing that one day, if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, their naval base on the Black Sea would be totally surrounded
right.
by NATO. So he said, oh, it was his first reaction. And I saw immediately that, oh yes, as a Russian, the obsession for the warm sea is there. Right. They want to have this access since Peter the Great.
Yep.
And Catherine II made it. And
And they took it from China, part of it.
Yes. And
1850-some.
Absolutely. And so Prihodko told me, but did you talk about this project with the Americans? I said no, because Chirac wanted to see with you whether you would be interested. So it's only a draft. We have to elaborate it. It's very complicated. He said yes, but talk about it. And so I went to Germany because that's the instinctive reflex we have. We must consult the Germans. And the Germans told me, it was 2006, Madame Merkel was in her post of a chancellor since 1 year. So she didn't want to engage. And so the answer was, do ask the Americans. So I went to Washington, and I went and I met with Condoleezza Rice, who had been my interlocutor during the Iraq War.
She is the one that is pushing the East.
And she is pushing, but she's remarkable, I would say, a remarkable woman. The way she's a self-made woman in a way, and so she's remarkable. So I admired her very much. We didn't share anything together, or any opinion. We were in opposite position all the time, in confrontation, but we could discuss. And I went there. I showed it the draft, and I said I was by the Russians, and that's their reaction. How do you react to this idea of a cross-protection by NATO one side, Russia the other side? And she laughed. And she said, but Maurice, what is that? You have tried to prevent the first wave to take place of the countries joining NATO. You will not stop the second wave of countries joining NATO. I remember her words in my ears.
Right.
And from that moment, 2006, we understood that the US wanted Ukraine to be part of NATO. Oh, and that was, I think,
so true.
Maybe people say this is the Russian brief. This is the way Russian people present the things. It's part of the reality. There are countries which are by nature between two major ensembles. And so, yes, one says every country has the right to choose its own alliance. But look at countries like Austria. Austria is still neutral. Austria didn't fear any pressure from the East. And so you will tell me there is Sweden, there is Finland, but this is because the invasion in Ukraine. Ukraine had, I would say, a destiny which is to be a buffer country. Ukraine itself means the march, means the frontier in Russian, Ukraina. And so here we are. And so in my view, as long as we shall not have the guarantees of security and to protect the neutrality of Ukraine, and we have Ukraine in the middle of the road, things will be very complicated on the international stage.
Okay, let's leave that alone for the time being because we're not going to solve that problem right here. But I'm very intrigued by what Chirac and you cooked up of how to keep Ukraine workable. Let's change the subject a little. America. It's the big elephant in the room. And whatever happened in America moves the world. Where do you see America moving towards? Is the Donald Trump thing something reversible? Although people say that don't blame Donald Trump for everything because America has been moving in a certain direction for the last 50, 60 years. Donald Trump just kicked it down the abyss, that's all. I think that's probably correct. So how do you see the future of America because it's so important?
I am not an expert on America, so I must say what I say. I must be very humble when I talk about the U.S. But the U.S. was in fact a sort of alma mater of, I would say, the so-called free world at the time. It's thanks to the Americans that and the Russians together, but thanks to the Americans that the Second World War went to an end. We were freed by the Americans.
And they saved Asia. American saved Asia, including China.
Asia, including China, because of the Japanese. And so we had a certain idea of the American dream. The American model was also there. I was just reminding this meeting I had with Helmut Schmidt when I was in Germany. And
former
Helmut
Chancellor
Schmidt,
of Germany.
Yes, former Chancellor of Germany. He was an old man when I met him. He was 95. He had experienced the Second World War. And we had a long chat because it's always interesting to listen to someone who has been the chancellor of a major country, but also who was a man for peace, a man who rebuilt his country. And he said to me, we Germans, we owe everything of our rebirth to the Americans. After the war, they helped us. There was the Marshall Plan and all that. Now, and this conversation took place in 2013. He told me, 2013. He told me now we have an America, we have United States who have totally lost the awareness of the responsibilities which are the ones of the country which has the leadership in the world. So, and he told me the generations of great Americans of the Eastern Coast in particular, who were, I would say, having the global vision of the world, this generation doesn't exist anymore. And I thought that this idea of the awareness of being the leader and having lost the idea of what means leadership was a key idea of what the US is becoming now. And if we look at the US of today, check and balance, how will it last? We have seen what the beginning of a decision by the Supreme Court regarding the tariffs. What will come out of it? It's difficult to say. We see that there are threats. We see that all this, the shutdown. We attend lots of events which you follow every day yourselves. Plus the fact that on the international stage, the Americans who were not, I would say, the ones who were the best supporters of multilateralism, but the rules of the game, let's call them like that, which were set up after the Second World War with the Americans. They were involved. In fact, the more the time went, the more they detached, they unhinged from that. And considering that being number one everywhere, military, finance, legal, research, technologies, it was not for them. And so we have seen already, even under Obama, I remember the WTO Court of Appeal was never given the judges they need because the Americans never put the judges, appointed the judges in the right place. So the regulation of the international trade, which was something we had achieved after the GATT with the setting up of the WTO, it was no more possible. And so what I see is a mix of isolationism, America first, America for itself, and hegemony at the same time. And so, if we, and first, and if I read, I have read, I advise you to read it, The Art of the Deal by Mr. Trump himself, this book, in which he explains what is the art of the deal. The art of the deal, you shaken the interlocutor, and then you leave him think in the total uncertainty. That's exactly what he's doing. Threat, intimidation, and if necessary, coercion and usage of the force. And so that's the US as we see it. Plus, in the framework of the race on key technologies, obsession on rare earths, energy, finance, by all means, and to put an end to every kind of regulation, internal regulation, international regulation. And these are the libertarians which are around him. J.D. Vance, in my view, if I follow closely, I read the book he wrote, J.D. Vance is a typical, I would say, example of a successful American when we see where he comes from. That's interesting. For a European like me, it's a bit an alien, but he is real, he exists. And he is a pupil of Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the living example of libertarianism. All these Silicon Valley people are around them. And so that's the future of the US. I say withdrawal from the international stage, unplugging of all commitments possible, and hegemony by all means. That's why all that is creating instability, and that's why the two only stable zones of the world are still China on its own and the EU on its own, with each of them having their own way of ruling and working, and if possible, together.
So interesting. I just asked one last question, and then we'll open to the floor. Tonight, for those of you who are President Circle members of the Asia Society and corporate members, we're going to have a private dinner. We're going to delve deeper into this stuff, and it's off the record. So I think I look forward to that. My last question to you is this: what do you think what is the game that China is playing? What do they want to see? What kind of role do they perceive themselves to play in the international arena? And will China, Europe be able to, Ukraine elephant aside, will one day build much closer economic ties, if not also political ties, as America retreats to isolationism, which you imply?
You ask me about what the policy of China can be. Not being Chinese, it's only the view by an outsider and how I observe it. I have looked very closely to the new 15th five-year plan, which in my view is the typical, I would say, embodiment of how China thinks. And that's the advice I give always to my friends in Europe. Do read what the China write, because it's the result of the outcome of long consultations within the party, and the party is 100 million people, and they don't think alike. All of them have their own ideas. We know what the party's life is in Europe, with tiny parties. So, and such a huge, it means even more ideas, even more quarrels, even more, I would say, fights and debates. What I see is the capability of China to adapt and to have the long vision. If I look at Trump, his vision goes to the midterm, end of 26. China's vision goes far away. So to 2035, and then 2049
Right.
as a major issue, but the ones who decide will not be longer there in 2049. So the long-term vision is there. Capacity of adaptation. When I see the tone is interesting because the tone is assertive. It's very assertive. I think the 15th years plan is the 15th plan. The 15th five-year plan is more assertive than the other one. China is more inflexible, and China is more competition. But at the same time, what I see is China doesn't want to impose its own system on others, which makes the difference with many other countries who want to impose who they are. But in my view, what China wants, if not imposing, is to be indispensable. To be indispensable everywhere.
Economically,
technologically.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing. So it's an ambition, and my view is, why shouldn't be part of this ambition? There must be ways and means of having this discussion. We thought of the triangle at the beginning of our discussion, EU, US, China. But EU, China, there are plenty, I would say, of ground to find common project, common successes. The European interests don't overlap always the American interests. So how can we depart from this line of following the Americans too much? But the question will come very soon, because I guess the US will try to have us with them to contain China. There is this experience of Nexperia. Nexperia recently,
Yes.
you know, what we would like
Yes.
is to attract Chinese investments in Europe. As there were European investments in China, now it's the reverse. But if there are Chinese investments in Europe,
investors,
investors,
Yeah.
yes, companies investing. If these companies are threatened by sanctions from the US, which was the case for Nexperia. Nexperia, Chinese company, subsidiary of a company based in China, which is under sanction, on the blacklisted, let's say. What will Nexperia do? Maybe what they did was not very agile, or not very, was a bit clumsy. But are we able to detach ourselves from any pressure from the US who would tell us, you must do this, you must do that, and in that case to seize a company with the prejudice, with the damage it is doing not only to Chinese vehicles, but to the European production of automotive, in the automotive industry. So we must have mechanisms, I would say, if we do like that. So, but there are possibilities. The more we talk to each other, we have some structures for dialogue between China and the EU, but we don't talk enough. The more we talk to each other, the better it is. The more there are human exchanges between China and the EU, the better it is. I would say since the COVID, the level of exchange of students to China is much lower than it was in the past. I remember we had at the time of Madame Consul General being the Deputy Director General for Asian Affairs, we had 10,000 Chinese students every year. So on the whole, on three years, we had 30,000 Chinese students in France. Now we have a few thousand. And in China, we have a few hundreds where we had thousands and thousands. We had French campus in Shanghai and in many other cities. This has shrunk a lot. So, and I speak for France, but it's the case for all the European countries. Let's know each other, because and that's something we have as diplomats. That's the most important. Let's talk to each other. Let's listen. Let's try to understand. Let's try to decipher. Let's try to find out cooperations. That's the purpose of the diplomacy, and which is so necessary. Diplomacy belongs not only to diplomats, but belongs to everyone, to talk to each other and find out ways and means to work together.
I'm with you there, and I got a little bit of good news for you. In Shanghai today, there are so many good French restaurants started by French people that almost every other district you go, you can have really good French food. So that's people-to-people diplomacy. But anyway, okay, open to the floor. Anyone have a question, please raise your hands. The gentleman with the cap over there, and then Glenn Falk here, and then the gentleman at the back.
Hello, thank you so much for your sharing. I hope to ask a question for your comment, not for your comment, for your point of view of Mr. Henry Kissinger, who was the former Secretary of the State. So, Mr. Henry Kissinger, in his book, The Diplomacy, he wrote extensively about the balance of power and the modern European world order. And he focuses on Austria and Germany, how they build their country and how they establish their power. And at the same time, Mr. Kissinger, he was also a big contributor to build up the Chinese and United States relationship during 1978 by the President Nixon and Chairman Mao for the ping pong diplomacy. So I would like to ask for Mr. your view is how do you see, what would Mr. Henry Kissinger see the future of these three countries? Thank you.
I see you are a great reader of Henry Kissinger. That's a good reading. And it's interesting to see what means balance of power, balance of force, because it's the key of in diplomatic relations. And if everyone is fighting each other, which would be the edge on which we must work? What must be the monitoring? What will be the confidence-building measures? And Henry Kissinger was a realist. I am a partisan of realism, which doesn't mean realpolitik. Realpolitik is cynical. Realism means who is the stronger one? Could we work with the stronger one? Should we find out some compromise? Who makes the first step? And so I wouldn't have Mr. Kissinger speak. I can speak on his behalf. But when I say that there is a reality, which is there is a conflict in Ukraine, this conflict is preventing us from working together. What are the ways and means to work and find out solutions so that we can establish something in the new context of having Trump in the US and the evolution of the US stage and China as it is, leading country in its own region, leading country in the world with ambition of being indispensable to the rest of the world. Where are the points where we can work together, find out the right compromises? There must be first steps done by some. So if we want EU, I'm not Kissinger, but if we want EU and China to work together, let's consider that both sides should make the first step together. You see, inflexibility, rigidity is something which is damageable. So China should make a first step, the EU should make a first step and not have this dialogue of death. We talk, but we don't listen what the other has to say. That's what I would say.
Whereas Henry is a very dear friend of mine.
Yes,
I spent a lot of time
you could
with
answer
him.
in my place.
No, I'm not going to answer. I spent quite a bit of time with him in this last couple of months. And from my perspective, yes. What Maurice has said is very much the way, in my opinion, how Henry Kissinger see diplomatic issues. But anyway, I better not say too much. Glenn Falk.
Thank you, Ronnie. Maurice, thank you very much for sharing with us your insights about EU in China, EU and the rest of the world. So can I ask a question about EU internally? You know, given that you have many countries forming now, and going back to your earlier point that you cited June 25th, 1941 was the most memorable day for France. Now, given that Germany was your most fierce enemy during World War II, now in times of change, particularly with different political parties, both in your country as well as in Germany, how tight is that relationship under very distressed New World Order? That's my question.
So, yes, the EU, these are 27 countries. 27 countries which have each of them a collective emotional memory and different interests, but also shared interests, a corpus of values which is democracy, rule of law. This we share, all of us. France and Germany, which are in fact the two leading countries. But we must not forget that there are other stronger countries like Italy, like Poland, like Sweden, Spain, of course. So these countries are there. We have also a major asset in the EU, which is the Franco-German reconciliation. You were referring to what I said, which is 25th of June 1940. Would have the leaders of that time imagine that we would be the best allies for the future? I am the first generation of Frenchmen who has not made war with the Germans for the last 300 years. So what we did, what we achieved between the French and the Germans, because of the powerful will of General de Gaulle and Chancellor Adenauer, were very singular persons, very unique persons. It has been achieved. Maybe other countries can do it. So now we have an evolution of our political stage, as you were referring to. You were referring to populist countries, whether, in fact, the EU would survive to populism. Populism appears everywhere, in every country. It's linked with nationalism. It's linked also with frustration of populations in front of certain challenges which are not dealt with by governments. It's a danger. It's a danger because all the corpus of values and rule of law is at stake. It's also a danger because populist movements have a tendency to withdraw on themselves, to cut off links with the rest of the world, which is very dangerous in a world which is so much intertwined, interconnected. What I am looking at is that at the moment, if I look at the AfD in Germany, they are no longer for a Dexit, so leaving the EU. In France, the Frexit is no longer on the table by these movements. I think is not yet born the ones who would like to have a sort of Brexit with his own country. So I think the EU as such is not at stake. What is at stake is the public order, is the trust you will have in governments of that kind who have very, I would say, complicated programs, or not sophisticated, but I would say rough programs rather. When I say complicated, difficult to apply. So it will be something very different of what we have now. The fact is that there are challenges which must be tackled. If it were by others than those parties you were referring to, who have this nationalistic approach, this stubborn approach, that would be better. But I wouldn't say that the survival of the EU as such is at stake at the moment.
But follow up. Germany is really in serious trouble in many, many ways. Immigrants is one problem. The infrastructure is really falling apart. In France, you also have your problems. We all know that. And then in both places, you may have the right wing rising. Yes. You think that all these things will impact the Franco-German relationship that Glenn was talking to? Will it one day be loosened to such an extent that it threatens the future of EU?
Yes, your question is right, and it's coming in a context which is always the context of the French-German relationship. When I have been 7 years of my life, diplomatic life in Germany, and 4 years as an ambassador, and 5 years at President Chirac's office, where we were in charge of preparing the summits, the meetings between the president and the chancellor. We are never the same opinion. We share never the same opinion. The Germans are here, we are there. But the willingness, the political will as such, always exists that, yes, we must find out a way to do something together. The question is whether this will loosen in the future. So far, we have institutions which enframe us to, and I would say compel us, to find out ways of convergences between both. So far it had worked, but it's true that this relationship between France and Germany is now more asymmetrical than it was in the past. They have no depths, we have depths. We have a better rate of birth They have a very bad rate of birth. We have a stronger military. They have a weaker military. And there is a change on the stage which make all this be reconsidered by both countries. But I am a believer of this relationship between France and Germany because it's a necessity. When we reconciliated, it's not because we didn't want to make war again. It was because we are sticking both countries to the same values since the 18th century, since the Enlightenment and the Lumière. So I think it's something very profound which will not be get rid of.
I hope you're right. The gentleman at the back. Yeah. No. The third one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You spoke quite extensively about the invasion of Ukraine being a barrier to rapprochement between Europe and China. But my question is whether you think China has an interest in seeing the war in Ukraine continue because it keeps the US out of the Pacific theater, among other things.
I read this interpretation, but I think everyone has an interest for peace. And so when you have peace, you have more stability, you have more, I would say, space to find out solutions of cooperation. So I wouldn't say any country would have an interest in having a war to be prolonged.
The lady right in the middle. If you're holding the mic as a staff, watch me, okay?
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation today. My name is Ginny. I recently relocated to Hong Kong and I've lived in France. I come from a very small country called Singapore. So I'm asking the question from a very small country's perspective. One of the questions I have is on cooperation and in particular, clean energy, clean technology, because all of us are actually concerned about climate and making sure that we have a space for future generations. So my question is, there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, there's overproduction of solar panels or clean technology from China, and we're going to put tariffs on them. Rather than tariffs, what about thinking about subsidies and clean technology? Because that would solve your first desire of not being dependent on Russia for oil, because clean technology doesn't throw tantrums typically. So interested to hear your opinion on that.
But nature throws tantrums.
So so regarding Singapore, always consider countries, it's not the size of a country which is important, it's how the country behaves and the ambitions of the country. And Singapore, I remember a phrase said by Lee Kuan Yew himself, that was that we are a small country, but the world is our hinterland. And that's something I like very much. So regarding the climate and climate change, this is the major stake, the major challenge for the whole planet. This is in particular a sector, a domain in which the EU and China work together. As you know, the Americans have withdrawn, though one must be more nuanced regarding the US, because the federal state has withdrawn, the administration of Trump. But you have many towns, you have some states, you have companies who are still, I would say, doing the necessary to fight against the climate change and to take the necessary measures. You are talking about this overcapacities in panels and all that. That's an issue which is an industrial issue. It doesn't mean that countries don't want to work together. But who produces, who sells, and at what price? And in a competition, fair competition or not, with the ones who have their own production. So it's an issue which is that there are many layers in your issue. What I am very confident with is that climate change is an issue which is at the first rank by the EU and by China. And if we see the achievements of both, we are leading and showing to the rest of the world what can be done, trying to help them. We shall see what the COP30 will produce, but the industrial issue must be set apart.
Europe is truly a leader in this, and I think China is the only other big economy who is really with you on this thing. Last question, Dr. Philip Chai.
Thank you. This fascinating dialogue. I really appreciate your time. I want to ask a question about this Sino-Europe EU comprehensive agreement on investment. In 2021, that sort of the final negotiation agreement signing was kind of frozen, right, because some political issues. But recently, it looked like there's some of progress, such as EV, electric vehicle, sort of the discussion and technical stuff, and also some of the news report that maybe there's some of the additional progress on this front. I want to know your assessment, how likely this comprehensive agreement can be hopefully signed in the coming futures, and what are the obstacles right now, and what are the things that we can do to help that accelerate that?
So
Just let you know that I'm a Chinese living in Hong Kong. I was born in Xinjiang. I was born in Xinjiang, and because 2021, some of the members in the European Parliament use the Xinjiang as an excuse to block the things. Can we invite them to go there to see more?
Thank you for your intervention, because of course that was this negotiation which lasted for about 12 years and 30 rounds of negotiation. And I remember when I was in Beijing, we were always thrilled. Well, we'll come out of this round of negotiation. And at the end, it was the end of the German presidency, Mrs. Merkel being president, and we finally, eventually, we sign with China on comprehensive agreement of investment. So a level playing field, access to the market. It was not on trade, it was on investment, but it was a good start, and it was the first time we had something solid. Not everything was settled, but it was the beginning of something. Coincidentally, at the same time, the Xinjiang issue comes up, and the Congress takes some measures, some sanctions, and the European Parliament reacts the same, takes the same path, and there is a retaliation by China. We could have foreseen all that. And this agreement has been put into a drawer. What I think now is that, yes, we have these EV issues, electric vehicles issue, and the opposite measures taken by China, which are still there. There are discussions on it. There are maybe solutions to be found. The discussions are going on. So I am quite confident that because of the necessity, we shall find something. But what strikes me is that we have, with the CAI, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, tools to work together. Of course, the world had changed, but we could adapt. There could be something done between this European Union and China to work together and to have step forwards in cooperations. So I am quite confident one day the CAI or something of the kind will come up. It depends, of course, on the first step made by the one and the other, which I mentioned, but I am quite confident. And I went to Xinjiang, I went to Kashgar, which is a good memory. And so, I remember our guide telling us, oh, we are here as Uyghurs, but let's remember for centuries, we sent our princesses to be wives of the Chinese emperor.
And vice versa. The Chinese princess also went west. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have this discussion. So I think we should give a round of applause to our wonderful speaker. For those of you who have President Circle members and corporate members who have signed up for dinner, please go as soon as possible to the Li Guowei room, and then we will begin right away. We will have an in-depth discussion, hopefully, with Ambassador Gourdault-Montagne until he's too tired. Thank you. Okay.